It is a sincere pleasure to welcome Robert Kaplan back to this podium. I think this must be your 8th visit, and it's always a pleasure to have you here. With each one of his presentations, something always emerges that reshapes our understanding about the past, enables us to reevaluate the present, and influences our thinking about the future. Today, he will be discussing his latest book entitled In Europe's Shadow: Two Cold Wars and a 30-Year Journey through Romania and Beyond.
In this book, I do something different that I haven't done in previous books. Previous books are about big regions or, many countries. Balkan Ghost covered like 6 countries. Monsoon was the whole Indian Ocean. Here I do the opposite. I take one country, which is unfairly obscure, and I use it to discuss big issues. The Holocaust, the Cold War, the challenge of Putin, imperialism, good and bad, the Habsburgs, the Russians, the Byzantines, the Turks. Romania was the marchland of empires. And so I use one country as sort of a vessel to explore big topics, and most of all, to explore the meaning of Europe. What is Europe? Where's it going in this current crisis? And let me put it this way. If you were Romania or Poland in the mid-1990s, 20 years ago, the world looked fantastic. You were getting into NATO, and what could be stronger and better than NATO? You were getting into the European Union. What could be healthier and stronger and more vibrant than the European Union in 1995? And Russia, here's the kicker. Russia was then conveniently weak and chaotic under Boris Yeltsin's semi-competent rule. So your historical nemesis, Russia, was nowhere to be seen. You were leaving history behind. History was over. History, with all of its hatreds and wars and violence, was over. The Americans were strong. It was the unipolar moment. Now fast forward to 2015, if you're Romania or you're Poland, for instance, or Latvia or Bulgaria or whatever. The EU is weak. It's tottering. And because the EU is tottering, what never gets mentioned in the newspapers is that weakens NATO. Because NATO ultimately depends on the EU, though it cannot be said. Because without European unity, ultimately there is no NATO. And Russia is no longer weak and chaotic. Russia is led by a very capable, organized, disciplined autocrat with a very specific geopolitical vision, which he is prosecuting methodically. So suddenly history is back, in a sense. I had a long talk with Romania's president at the time, Traian Băsescu. Băsescu was an old sailor in the merchant marine maritime service, a real old communist who knew the score. And he said to me, "You don't understand. Article 5 of NATO doesn't protect us, doesn't protect anyone. Because Article 5 is what happens if Russian troops move across the border. That's not the face of Russian imperialism in the 21st century. The face of Russian imperialism in the 21st century is a pharaonic network of oil and gas pipelines. It's buying media through third parties in order to influence public opinion. It's running criminal rackets, running intelligence operations, shaping public opinion, supporting extreme right and extreme left-wing parties. This is classic imperialism. Remember, imperialism is not necessarily aggressive and militaristic. It can be very subtle in the way that a big power can influence vast regions. He said Article 5 gives us no protection against any of this because it's all so subtle that it's always deniable, and therefore we're terrified. Let me tell you what I learned about Europe through Romania. First of all, Europe is redividing into Cold War halves. It's like a retro kind of effect we're seeing. Western Europe is obsessed with terrorism. And because it's obsessed with terrorism, it essentially is open to making a deal with Putin over Ukraine. Because succeed or fail, Russia is militarily heavily involved in Syria, and therefore has some ability to affect the outcome there, the flow of refugees, for better or for worse. And therefore, Russia, because it went into Syria, has leverage over France, over Germany, and other places that it didn't have before. But if you're in Eastern Europe, you're obsessed still with Ukraine. Western Europe is forgetting Ukraine. It's unclear whether the sanctions will last beyond this summer. But in Eastern Europe, because of reasons of geography and history, you're still obsessed with the Russian threat. So Western Europe, Russia may be a good thing. Eastern Europe, Russia is a bad thing. Also, Western Europe is cool to the US. Eastern Europe is desperate for American help because deep down, countries like Romania, Poland, the Baltic states, etc., do not trust NATO. They know that their real protection is not Brussels, it's the Pentagon. Putin is playing this well, or at least trying to. He's using the fear of ISIS on one hand in Western Europe, but on the other, he's trying to move ahead with a second Nord Stream pipeline, which will bring natural gas directly from Russia under the Baltic Sea to Western Europe, to Germany, the Low Countries, and France. That way, bypassing Eastern Europe and having a direct link in order to solidify ties between Russia and Western Europe. So this is where energy geography intersects with terrorism in the Middle East to bind together Western Europe and Russia while Eastern Europe is exposed and looking solely to the US. The real fear I have of Russia is not Russian strength, it's Russian weakness. The same with China, for instance. It's not Chinese strength, it's Chinese weakness. Because I think the economies in those countries are going to steadily get worse. We're only in an early phase of an economic decline. You're going to see separatist movements in the North Caucasus, in the Russian Far East, and other places. China has its Uyghur Turkic population, etc. And this internal weakness is going to fuel external aggression. Because, in other words, it's not Hitler, it's not Nazi Germany where external aggression was fueled by internal economic strength. It's the opposite. It's using nationalism as a way to bind the country together in the face of economic catastrophe. And what Putin will try is he's doing it. Look, there's a whole chapter in my book about Moldova. The real Russian threat is in the southern front, not in the northern front, because the Kremlin knows that if it tries something in the Baltics, the West is more likely to fight than if it tries something in what I call the greater Black Sea area, the Pontic Breach. So look at Moldova, look at Kaliningrad, where the Russians would like to establish a land corridor to get to the Black Sea, and look at it not in terms of Russian invasion, but in terms of frozen conflicts that are always deniable, inciting local elements, and many of the things, but on a higher speed, that the former Romanian president, Basescu, told me about. There was an American political scientist in the 1950s, Robert Strauss Hupé, who was an Austrian immigrant and who wrote a book about protracted conflict. And he said protracted conflict is recognizing that war is a natural human condition, peace is unnatural. But war doesn't have to be violent. It can be constant probing operations. And probing operations, when they get out of hand or they don't meet a response, often lead to a big war. What we've seen in Russia with Syria, in the Ukraine, in Crimea, China and the South China Sea is classic probing operations. In other words, you probe, you go further each time, and if you get a response, you retreat. If you don't get a response, you go a little further each time, until such a time as it comes when the party that has not been responding is forced to respond. But at a much, so we live in a time of classic probing operations. What this means in Europe is a centerpiece of American strategy has to be to defend what I call the greater intermarium. The intermarium is a Latin word for between the seas, between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. The term was invented by a former Polish leader after World War I, Józef Pilsudski. But Pilsudski had actually gotten the idea from a British geographer about 10 years earlier, Halford Mackinder, who talked about the need for a belt of democratic, vibrant states between Germany and Russia. Because if those could not be created, World War I would lead to World War II, because nothing was solved in World War I. Mackinder wrote this in 1919 when everybody was celebrating the Versailles Treaty, to show you how clairvoyant he was. Because World War II was really about Germany and Russia as a land conflict. I call it, and what is the intermarium? It starts in Estonia in the north, actually in Finland, and it goes down to Bulgaria in the south, with its two biggest elements being Romania and Poland. I now call it the greater intermarium because I include the Caucasus, because right now Armenia is a bought and paid for satellite of Russia, with I think 5,000 Russian troops on the ground. This is not Armenia's fault, it's the decisions it has to make. Georgia is undermined by Russia. The only independent state in the Caucasus is Azerbaijan, and that's because it has so much oil and natural gas. And that's the real Russian prize. Can they undermine Azerbaijan? Can they essentially step up from having Armenia as a satellite to Azerbaijan as a semi-satellite, the way Brezhnev stepped up from having Somalia as a satellite to having Ethiopia as a satellite in the mid-late 1970s. So the greater intermarium is to me the centerpiece of how an American administration has to look geopolitically at Europe. And then we get to Europe itself. Because the EU is more than a balance sheet, though that's how it's written about. It's more than a balance sheet, because one thing I learned researching this book is that people in places like Romania have a far less cynical attitude towards the European Union than people in Western Europe do. To them, the EU is survival at stake itself. It's survival because it's about states, legal states, and impersonal bureaucracies, and the protection of the individual, not about ethnic nations and age-old loyalties and conflicts. The EU leads places like Romania and Poland out of that world, essentially. And that's why the EU is so crucial to the future of Central Eastern Europe. However, the EU is facing all these problems. We know Russian revanchism, the refugee crisis, terrorism. But if you had to boil the EU's problems down to one thing, upon which all these other things, or some of these other things, could be alleviated, it would be structural economic reform. And structural economic reform is necessary, ironically, because of the social welfare state. After World War II, the main political economic response to the sufferings of two world wars and the human devastation was the creation of a humane social welfare state. The problem has been that except in the most efficient and dynamic North European societies, the social welfare state, as it is presently constituted, is impossible to afford. And that's what's been the real drag on the European economy. And because of that, you have zero growth. And with zero growth, populations are less willing to absorb new immigrants, especially Muslim immigrants. If you had a 5% growth rate in Europe economically, the attitude towards Muslim migrants would be much different than it is now. But it isn't. It's zero. They're flatlining. And a main reason why they're flatlining is because of the failure of structural reform, which itself is based on the difficulty of sustaining this level of a social welfare state. The EU is also very ambitious because it encompasses all these different empires with different cultural and, more importantly, economic and development traditions. What are the most important cities in the EU? Maastricht, The Hague, Strasbourg, Brussels. What geography is this? This is Charlemagne's empire. This is the Carolingian Empire from the 9th century. Starts at the North Sea, goes south towards Switzerland, has some branches in Milan and northern Italy, over to Frankfurt. This is still the heart of Europe after 1,200 years, the Carolingian Empire. And then you have the Prussian Empire, Berlin, which is the new power. Then you have the Habsburg Empire, and I'll get to that at the end of my talk. But at the other extreme, you have Mediterranean Europe, and you have Balkan, Ottoman, Byzantine Europe. Whether it's Romania, it's Bulgaria, it's Serbia, it's Macedonia, and it's Greece. It's not a pure accident that the most troubled part of the Eurozone is at its southeastern corner, a part of Europe that was, Greece being the poor stepchild of Ottoman and Byzantine despotism, rather than of the Carolingian Empire. That, Greece is the least well bureaucratized state in Europe in terms of institutions. Modern political parties, which didn't fully revolve around charismatic personalities, didn't develop in Greece till the 1980s or so. Greece is just, is institutionally far behind in that sense. So a united Europe takes in 4 or 5 imperial traditions, all with different development patterns. Now, when you look at Europe, here's the thing. Focus on France, because France is the pivot state. Because France encompasses both Northern Europe and Mediterranean Europe. It's big. It's almost as big as Germany, but it's not nearly as economically healthy as Germany. It's almost as economically troubled as Italy, for instance. So whichever way France goes will help determine the future of the Eurozone. Probably the most important point I'll make this morning. Europe is fracturing within while it's dissolving from without. It's fracturing within because of the economic problems, different responses to terrorism, different responses to refugees, etc. All these old imperial traditions that I'm talking about are all playing out today in the different responses to the refugees. We're seeing borders go up. The Schengen zone, which is the border-free zone, parts of Europe is under threat. So European divisions are coming back. Rather than the simplistic map of 2 Cold War blocs or of a united Europe from Iberia to the Black Sea, we're getting almost a new medieval map of dizzying complexity and incoherence. But it's dissolving from without because though European elites will not admit this, one of the reasons for the enormous success of Europe from the late 1940s till about 2008 or so was that Europe was blocked off from both Russia and the Middle East. It could develop alone. It was blocked off from Russia because, yes, I know Russia was communist. It had troops in East Germany, but Soviet Russia was led by stodgy, risk-averse bureaucrats. who had all survived Stalin's purges by essentially saying nothing and having no opinions on anything. So they survived. And the Americans handled the Soviet threat very well. And because the Americans dealt with it, the Europeans could spend their money on social welfare states. Then, even better, Russia was in chaos for 10 years. No threat there. But now, finally, Russia's strengthened, well, not recently, but over the first decade of the 21st century, Russia was strengthened because of oil and gas, and it now has an aggressive leader who's threatening Europe. So Russia is back on the table inside Europe. The Middle East, the Europeans could preach about human rights, but it was very lucky for Europe that the Arab peoples were locked up in prison states, led by dictator wardens, like the Assad family, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, where emigration was impossible, nobody could get passports, and there was stability. So Europe was separated from the Middle East. That's all ending now. These states are collapsed, or they're in Syria, they've been seriously weakened, and suddenly there's this rush of peoples. And Europe is learning the truth of the great French geographer Fernand Brauddel's theory of the 1940s, which is that Europe's southern border is not the Mediterranean, it's the Sahara Desert. That's the real southern border of Europe, because the Mediterranean is a unitary zone, where the northern Mediterranean is united with the southern Mediterranean, which means North Africa, Muslim North Africa. So we're finally seeing the beginnings of a Mediterranean unity in terms of terrorism and refugees that we really haven't seen since the collapse of the Roman Empire, or more specifically, the Islamic invasion in the 7th and 8th century, which separated North Africa from Europe. And the Balkans are back to being what they always were throughout history, which is a transition zone for migration from the Near East into Central Europe. That's always been the role of the Balkans. It's not an accident that Serbia is so troubled by refugees and why Croatia is putting up fences, Hungary, etc. And then we have, in the United States, the question is the United States becoming post-European in a sense? Does it have less of an interest in Europe than it had during the Cold War? Well, of course, there's East Asia, there's the Middle East, there's Latin America, and the United States is more and more focused on many regions, whereas during the Cold War it could have a laser eye focus on Europe. And just an aside, one thing I've noticed in the State Department and the Defense Department, you see all these young Deputy Assistant Secretaries of Defense and Deputy Assistant Secretaries of State, these people in their 30s, they're no longer of European background so much. They're from immigrant families from India, Latin America, and they come with different family histories, different interests. So that American foreign policy is slowly shifting. Because the age of where all these people had European names is over, or it's ending. I'll never forget what Silviu Brucan, the grand old man of Romanian communism, once told me in 1998. He had survived it. He was Giorgio Deja's speechwriter. He was Ceausescu's right-hand man. Then he broke with Ceausescu 2 years before 1989 and was one of a small group of people about the size of this table that essentially ordered the execution of the Ceausescus. He said to me, Robert, the West did not desert Eastern Europe in Yalta. It had deserted it 6-7 years before at Munich. The real geopolitical importance of Munich was not appeasement. It was the desertion of Central Eastern Europe by England and the West. Because by making a deal with Hitler, Western Europe and the United States were essentially saying Eastern Europe doesn't matter. It's not essential to us. That's when we would desert it. And so it raises the question, Are we deserting Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe now, though in a much more slower, gradual, less dramatic way than that? I would end with 2 points quickly. We all know that the Middle East has still not found a solution to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. My question is, has Europe found a solution to the collapse of the Habsburg Empire? The Habsburg Empire was about humanism, tolerance, cosmopolitanism, protection of minorities, stability. There's a great short story by Joseph Roth about a Habsburg count who's of Italian-Polish descent, who says, I'm not a Pole, I'm not an Italian, that's so barbaric. My loyalty is to the emperor, to something beyond nationalism. And that's very postmodern when you think about it. Has Europe found a permanent solution to the collapse of the Habsburg Empire? And just the final point is, Putin is a challenge. We can disagree with how to deal with him. Maybe we're being too aggressive, not aggressive enough, whatever. But remember that geopolitics in the hands of a liberal democracy, like those in Europe, like the United States, is essentially a moral enterprise. It's not a cynical, realpolitik enterprise. Because if liberal democracies do not use geopolitics, geopolitics will be in the hands solely of those who are opposed to us. And that was a book written by Robert Strauss Hupé in 1942 called Geopolitics, The Battle for Space and Power. Thank you very much.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.